Title: The Haunting of Ashford Manor, Chapter 1. The arrival as the sun began to set over the rolling hills of the English countryside. Sarah and Michael Marshall pulled up to the imposing stone gates of Ashford Manor. The ancient manor had been in Michael's family for generations, but neither Sarah nor Michael had ever visited the estate. Now, after the sudden death of Michael's father, they had inherited the sprawling estate and all its secrets. The couple's toddler, Lucy, was fast asleep in her car seat as the car rolled through the gates and made its way up the winding driveway. The manor loomed large in the fading light, its ivy-clad walls casting long, ominous shadows. As they stepped out of the car, a chill wind seemed to envelop them, despite the warm summer evening. Sarah shivered as she looked up at the darkened windows of the manor and felt a sudden unease settle over her. As they made their way inside, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The grand entrance hall was filled with antique furniture and old portraits, their eyes seeming to follow her as she walked. Michael seemed unaffected, his attention focused on the task of finding the master bedroom where they would be staying. As they settled into their new home, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She found herself checking over her shoulder at every sound, and the creaking of the old house seemed to fill her with a sense of dread. Chapter 2. The unsettling presence days turned into weeks, and the feeling of unease only grew stronger. Sarah constantly felt a chilly presence behind her, and the feeling of being watched never seemed to dissipate. She tried to ignore it, to focus on making the manor feel like a home for her family, but the sense of dread only deepened. One night, as she was putting Lucy to bed, Sarah heard a strange scratching sound coming from the bedroom next to theirs. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound was unlike anything she had ever heard before, and it filled her with a sense of primal fear. As she bravely crept towards the source of the noise, the scratching suddenly stopped, and she found herself standing outside a door she had never noticed before. Slowly, she turned the handle and pushed it open, revealing a small, dark room. A gust of cold air filled the space, and Sarah felt a sudden chill settle over her. In the faint light, she could make out the shapes of old furniture covered in dusty sheets and a row of portraits lining the walls. But it was the eyes in the portraits that caught her attention. They seemed to follow her, their gazes filled with a malevolent intensity that made her blood run cold. As she turned to leave the room, a loud crash echoed through the house, and Sarah stumbled as a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. She barely managed to make it back to her own room before collapsing into bed, her mind filled with a confusion and fear. Chapter 3. The Gathering Darkness to W. Weeks that followed were filled with strange events that only deepened Sarah's growing terror. Doors slammed shut on their own, strange shadows flickered in the corners of her vision, and the scratching sound seemed to follow her from room to room. The once bright and bustling manor had become a place of gloom and dread, and Sarah found herself constantly on edge. Her nerves frayed and her sleep disturbed by dark, haunting dreams. Michael, however, seemed oblivious to the strange occurrences that plagued the manor. He put it down to the stress of the move and Sarah's overactive imagination, and he did his best to comfort her. But as the days went by, even he could not deny the palpable sense of fear that hung over the house point one stormy night. As the wind rattled the windows and the rain pounded on the roof, Sarah was awoken by the sound of Lucy crying. As she stumbled out of bed and made her way to her daughter's room, she was struck by a sudden, overwhelming feeling of dread. As she reached Lucy's room and pushed open the door, she was confronted by a sight that made her blood run cold. The room was filled with the swirling mist, and the air crackled with an unnatural energy. Lucy's cries were drowned out by a strange, guttural voice that seemed to be emanating from the darkness. Sarah stumbled back in horror, and as she fumbled for the light switch, the room was suddenly plunged into darkness. She could feel a presence, cold and malevolent, and she knew with a bone-chilling certainty that they were not alone. Chapter 4. The unveiling of the past as the days turned into weeks. Sarah's fear reached a fever pitch. She was convinced that the manor was haunted, but Michael refused to believe her. He tried to reassure her that it was all in her mind, but Sarah could no longer deny the darkness that seemed to permeate every corner of the house. Desperate for answers, Sarah began to research the history of Ashford Manor. She uncovered a dark and twisted past, filled with tales of murder, madness, and unexplained disappearances. The manor had been a place of great suffering and sorrow, and the stories of the tormented souls that still haunted its halls sent shivers down her spine. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah delved deeper into the history of the manor, seeking out old letters, diaries, and records. She discovered a secret room hidden deep within the bowels of the manor, a room that had been sealed for generations. As she made her way through the dusty, cobweb-filled space, she found a collection of old journals that detailed the harrowing events that had taken place in the manor. The journal entries spoke of a dark entity that had haunted the manor for centuries, a malevolent force that had preyed on the inhabitants and left a trail of death and despair in its wake. As Sarah read on, the realization dawned on her that the entity was still present, its hateful presence growing stronger with each passing day. She knew then that her family was in grave danger.